Today, we will hear from the great Chris Adams, an ordained minister, clinical psychologist, and a certified well-being and leadership coach. Chris specializes in the well-being of ministerial students, clergy, and their family. Chris serves as a professor, chaplain, and executive director of the Mental Health and the Church Initiative at Biola's Graduate School of Psychology. And today he will be discussing the Flourishing in Ministry project. And to get things started, I'll just say welcome to Chris, and we look forward to your presentation and learning from you.
Vanessa, thank you so much. And thank you, Thad. It's been such a joy to be a part of the Common Table from its inception. And I was thinking this morning, driving into work, anticipating being with you all, that I was down in San Diego several years ago to speak to a group of pastors, and just happened to time it the same week that Comic-Con was happening in San Diego. And I went down sort of close to Comic-Con just to see an unbelievable experience, just to see how into that people are. But I was thinking, this is kind of like Comic-Con to me. This is my favorite gathering of people in the world. Like-minded folks. I see a lot of friends on the call today, and people that I have been mentors, and just really am honored that you're all here, and just thrilled to be here. So I just want to share, and many of you know this, but I'll share a little bit about the Flourishing in Ministry research. And I need to give credit to dear friend, Dr. Matt Bloom, who created this research over a decade ago now at the University of Notre Dame. And there was a whole team of folks that I was a part of for many years that worked on this. And Matt graciously handed that off, but I'm very indebted to him for mentoring me academically, as in research methodology, as well as starting this work. And it's just led to some really amazing things in my life and other people's lives. So I want to share with you a little bit about the research side for a few minutes. And then after we have some more time to connect in small groups, I'll share with you more about how we're taking that and translating that. This is an example of what's called translational research, which is a kind of research literature that comes out of the medical field. And it's research that seeks to ensure insights actually reach the individuals, the populations, the organizations that are being studied, and the knowledge can actually be applied in real world situations. So it's experience near, which is to say it's easily translatable into actionable kinds of things for people. We do care about the academic side and the rigor of the science and establishing that in the research literature, et cetera. But that's not the main goal. The main goal is we want to get insights and help to you, to the pastors and ministry leaders that you're serving. This has been a mixed method research project, so both qualitative and quantitative research. So what Dr. Bloom and the team did initially was look at all of the leading models of human flourishing in positive psychology, which is now a global movement. Many of you are aware of that. There are researchers all over the world studying what does it mean to flourish, and what are the factors and conditions and practices that foster that. And there's not a consensus in the field on how to define flourishing, but there's a lot of overlap of a lot of the leading models. And so we critically looked at all of those and started with what do we know from the research that's already there, and then did semi-structured interviews. I think it was over 400 of them, if I recall correctly, that were then coded, and we analyzed the themes from all those interviews, and that really helped us to decide which aspects of flourishing seem to be most relevant, most important for clergy in their very complex and important, joy-filled and also stressful roles. And that led us to developing a survey that became a phone app. And we're going to release the 2.0 version of that app here fairly early in 2024. That's how we collect the data, but it gives individual pastors feedback on their own well-being and all the key areas that we've identified, and suggests practices to them that we know from the global body of research will boost their well-being in that particular area if they practice that exercise with a certain minimal frequency and duration. And we've been looking at folks over time. And that's one of the areas of research with clergy that is there's not enough of, in my opinion. So the longitudinal research is so helpful. It's just so time consuming and expensive to do that a lot of denominations and Christian higher education institutions don't have the funding to do it. So we're hoping to make a contribution there as well and look at well-being before, during, after COVID long term, which others are doing as well, to kind of get a sense of things over time. So we know from previous research the kinds of things that lead to difficulty for clergy: stress, exhaustion, the unique stresses of life in a glass house, as some put it, for clergy families and marriages, burnout, depression. Pre-COVID, we were pretty confident in saying that about a third of ministry leaders at any given moment were in moderate to severe burnout. And the really interesting thing and challenging thing about ministry burnout is that it sneaks up on people. So the pastors in the interviews, just hundreds of them, said it hit me out of nowhere, it blindsided me, and the truth is it had been building through the mild and moderate phases until it hit a threshold of severity, and then really kind of hits people like a ton of bricks. And then it's costly. We're still learning about the relationship and differentiation of burnout and depression. There's some overlap there. Depression, we think, is a little bit higher than the general population of North America among clergy as a whole. And best we can tell, the rate of clinical depression for clergy spouses is higher than that of clergy, which is higher than that of the general population. And so wanting to learn more about that, we're looking into that. And then we're learning not just what prevents those things, but what promotes flourishing, what promotes the abundant life that Jesus talks about, what promotes flourishing in ministry work and life. This is the model, these 5 dimensions: daily well-being, resilience, thriving, and authenticity. And then the 5th dimension is the social ecosystem around the clergy leader. And that's also one of the cutting edge places where we're doing a deeper dive on the research side as well as the practical application side. What are the systemic factors, the organizational, congregational health factors, the environment, the work environment in which a clergy person is serving, because there is this dialectical relationship between the health of the leader, the health of that ecosystem, that goes both ways. And we're wanting to learn more deeply about how that works. How do we intervene in organizational systems that need some attention because they're so toxic or difficult that it sort of doesn't matter who you put in there as a leader and how healthy they are, or how much they pay attention to their own well-being. It's still going to be a tough road to hoe for anyone. And so how do we intervene at that systems level as well, educate elder boards and those kinds of things, denominational interventions, those sorts of things. We know all these dimensions are interconnected, and we're just learning more about how that's the case. But we know, for example, that daily well-being is the first thing to get low for clergy. And if it gets too low for too long, it starts to pull down all of the other dimensions. And I wanted to just touch on resilience here a little bit more in depth, just to give you a taste of what this is like. There's subdimensions to each one of these factors, because this is the area that right now I feel like is so challenging in the current cultural climate in which pastors are serving in North America, that is so polarized politically, so many difficult, complex issues happening. We've got another election cycle coming up in 2024, and just about every pastor I talk to is dreading that. Here we go again. And the conflict, church conflict, has just exponentially taken a leap to extreme places at times that are very challenging to navigate. And so we focus on the resilience of pastors in this way, because what we learned in this project is that what helps prevent burnout and promote resilience and flourishing is pastors cultivating self-regulatory capacities. It just takes an enormous amount of emotional self-regulation to be a pastor. It always has, probably, but in this current environment, it's particularly challenging because of the way people will treat one another in a congregation, or treat their pastor with vitriol and with contempt. And wanting to respond to that in a pastoral way and not just knee-jerk react to that in a way that's harmful. But how do you do that? How do you self-regulate in the midst of all of the intense interpersonal stress and conflict? And so developing these capacities, self-awareness, what am I doing, thinking, and feeling, and what impact is that having on me and other people? I think we've all probably seen examples of ministry leaders who had very little self-awareness, but were in a position of power. And that combination typically doesn't go well for anyone over time. So cultivating self-awareness, self-reflection is, why am I doing thinking and feeling what I'm doing thinking and feeling? Where's that coming from? Could be the nature of the situation, could be the people involved, that most any leader would be feeling a lot of this. It also can be something that's unique to a particular leader that gets activated or triggered. You hear that word a lot nowadays in their own story, and they need to be able to understand, where is this coming from, in order to exercise self-control, which of course is a fruit of the Spirit we're all created for. How do we then respond based on our self-awareness and self-reflection in some way that is a pastoral response? Very challenging, particularly right now, but this is very similar to emotional intelligence kinds of competencies, if you're familiar with that concept in literature. And the good news is that everybody can grow in this, and there are lots of practices that help us do that. Certainly, coaching is one of those, and we'll talk about that in the next section. There are many, many ways that we can help people grow in this. We all probably started at a different point in our abilities in this area, just given our family of origin formation, our genetics, our environment, our leadership history, et cetera. But everybody can grow if we're intentional about cultivating these kinds of self-regulatory capacities. And that helps boost our resilience and our overall thriving. And I'm just more and more seeing that as absolutely key for pastors to navigate the current just very challenging interpersonal climate in North America right now. And there are pastors that do this well. It takes extra time and energy. It can be exhausting. And yet there are ways for pastors to develop more capacity for assertiveness, conflict management, and to be able to self-regulate in ways that provide authentic, Christ-centered leadership. But it's going to take all of us to help pastors to do that out ahead. So I'll kick it back to you, Vanessa. I think we've got another small group time here.
Yes, so it's time to go back into our breakout rooms, and we'd like you to consider this question. Where do you see the need for increased self-awareness and EQ in the leaders you serve?
So I want to share with you a little bit about how we've translated this, and excited to share this with you. If I can get my computer to cooperate with me here. What we have done is translated the Flourishing in Ministry research into a Flourishing in Ministry coaching certification. So I got interested in coaching over the years because I found myself just developing relationships with clergy and coming alongside them and coaching many, many pastors into some other form of help. So pastors are often reluctant to self-refer to psychotherapy, for example, even when they would refer parishioners or just about everybody else in their life. There's something in clergy sometimes that says, I shouldn't need this. I shouldn't be feeling depressed. I shouldn't be feeling this way because I have an MDiv, I'm ordained. And so they can tend to not self-refer. But having a leadership coach is kind of what the cool kids do and the important people do. And so you can sort of sneak in the back door, I found, with coaching and do a lot of preventative work, but also it serves as a bridge. I want to just share briefly with you, again, Dr. Bloom and the team that I've been a part of went through the positive psych literature and looked at all the practices that the research says boost well-being in one of these dimensions that we've identified as important for clergy. And we categorize those into these 7 different strategies. And this is a really significant contribution, I think, that Dr. Bloom made in and of itself, because we know now how the dimensions of flourishing and ministry map onto these different strategies, and can sort of help people create a very strategically tailored, personalized rule of life. If you're familiar with that concept from Benedictine spirituality, the how do you sustain a rhythm of practices that help you promote flourishing and prevent depression and burnout and all the kinds of things we know clergy struggle with. And we can help people do that in a really informed kind of way. What's so fascinating to me about the global positive psych research is that many of those practices that are being studied are ancient Christian spiritual practices. So, for example, there's a huge literature on gratitude and gratitude practices, that if you practice gratitude exercises, then you become more grateful in your disposition as a person. It improves your physical health, your emotional health, your relational intimacy, etc. And that's not really a new concept for Christians. It's deeply biblical, in my opinion. And there are lots of other examples: Ignatian spiritual exercises people are studying, silence, solitude, all kinds of things that are not new to Christian spirituality. And so in some ways, it's recapturing what is already within our own broad tradition. But I want to share with you briefly why have we done flourishing, ministry, and coaching? Well, there's a lot of really good research support that coaching, especially around well-being and wellness and spiritual formation of leaders, is effective. So they're really, really good empirical research that this is helpful to people. One of the distinctions that my director of coach training, Dr. Sylvia Hart-Fried, likes to give is that psychotherapy is often archaeology, and coaching is architecture. In other words, therapy often revisits the past, and that's necessary to find healing. And especially if patterns of things keep getting in the way and keep coming up. Coaching is more present and future goal oriented. And so how do we help people set goals around their own formation and flourishing? My mentor in graduate school, the late Dr. Archibald Hart, used to say that pastors don't get into difficulty because they forget that they're pastors. They get into difficulty because they forget that they're persons. And so we're really focused on helping people know their strengths and thinking about solutions to increase their overall well-being and flourishing, and focus more on that than skill development per se. There's a lot of great coaching already out there for pastors on various pastoral skill kinds of things that's needed and helpful. We're more focused on the formation and well-being piece, which helps us focus on prevention. It's a bridge to other kinds of help that sometimes clergy might need, and we can coach them into that help, whether that's psychiatrist or therapist, marital therapist, whatever that might be over time. And we are hoping to help people connect the dots between their well-being and their leadership effectiveness. My contention would be that clergy health, clergy well-being is necessary in order for there to be congregational health and well-being. And we're just learning about how that flow goes back and forth between the ecosystem of the pastor and the pastor themselves. But coaching can be really effective in helping people connect the dots between their own formation or lack thereof and things that they're experiencing in leadership, and how that's playing out, whether that's effective or not, those kinds of things. We also, and this is informed largely by Dr. Thad Austin's work, and if you haven't read his book on caring for clergy, I highly recommend you do that. What we know is that in the clergy care space, as sort of a cottage industry, if you will, we need more research. So it's things that we're doing are based on rigorous scholarship and science, and also best practice informed. There are a number of things that are phenomenal that are out there, and many of you on this call lead those things. There are other things that concern me that are well-intentioned, but are not informed by research or best practice from a clinical or professional ethical standard kind of perspective. And so we wanted to do a coach training and coaching based on the research and also best practice informed. So we are accredited as a level 2 coach training entity by the International Coaching Federation, which is the the gold standard globally at this point in the coaching world. Coaching, as I have delved into it, is sort of a wild, wild west of unregulated quality. Anybody can call themselves a coach and put up a website, have zero higher education or credentials of any kind. But ICF does have core competencies that are thoroughly researched. You have to demonstrate those competencies and take an exam and do continuing education to keep your ICF credential and so forth. So there's at least some kind of bar of quality, and we have found that to work really well. I've been surprised at how effective coaching can be. Having been trained as a therapist, coaching is much more directive. It's much more solution focused. And even in a 30-minute coaching conversation, I've been amazed at how much you can accomplish and get done and get to some really important core issues with folks. And we do have some alums who've gone through our training on the call here. I see Tim Cargill and Janice, and hello to you folks. And I'm sure there are others I'm not seeing on my screen. And Steve Tungate, Michael Bischoff, who's done coaching forever. If you want to talk to a seasoned coach, talk to Michael. So I want to just put that out there. There are lots of ways of helping pastors, and we're trying to be in this sort of space in between pastors not getting any help and being isolated, and maybe being in actual treatment, which sometimes they need to be. We're hoping to prevent that and also serve as a bridge to that through Flourishing Ministry Coaching and Coach Training.
Good. Such good stuff. So as you go into your breakout room, consider this question to discuss. How might coach training and or coaching be valuable in your role or in your context?
Well, thank you all for listening and being here. I think the other thing I wanted to mention, I'll put a slide back up here just so you have contact information if you're interested in becoming and getting a coach. We've got a whole group of folks across the country who have been trained, and some of them are bicultural and bilingual in Spanish and Korean as well as English. And we have a coach training cohort coming up starting in January. It's a 16-week training, which is the length of an academic semester. So we tried to time it around that since we're out of an academic institution. 2 hours a week, on Zoom. So have synchronous training where we're doing live stuff together. It's highly experiential, a lot of coaching practice and a lot of feedback, which is how we grow, by practicing and getting feedback about it. It's how we learn to do it well. And then an hour or two of asynchronous work a week, reading, watching some videos, those kinds of things. And we'll do a summer cohort, fall, spring. We're going to have an intensive form of this probably in the summer as well, where people can knock the training out in like a week or two. But I wanted to mention the importance of group coaching. What we know from the Flourishing research and other projects, and I just happened to see Regine Prashad-Bell here from the Duke Clergy Health Initiative. Hey, Regine, who's done some phenomenal work around all these kinds of things as well. That it's very helpful for clergy to be in a community of practice in some way. They tend not to do that as much as other helping professions get together with their particular guild, as it were, as long as there's a trained facilitator. That's sort of the caveat that seems to be there in previous research, that if it's a self-directed group, it can devolve either into a competition, a one-upping each other's ministry success, however we define that, or it can devolve into kind of one-upping each other's misery in ministry, as if there's a medal for that or something, in a martyrdom kind of way that may not be healthy. So having a trained facilitator, that one of the metaphors we use in the training is the coach keeps the river within the riverbank. So you're serving as the riverbanks. The river's going to meander and flow, but you're going to keep it within those boundaries and go somewhere constructive. And I've just found enormous joy and effectiveness in clergy group coaching when it is facilitated well. Pastors end up feeling a sense of community because other people in the group understand their world. They don't have to explain to everybody what it's like. Everybody just knows, even across denominational lines, with significant theological differences, which are not unimportant. But when you get people talking about the day-to-day experience of being a religious leader, there are lots and lots of things that are common to that experience, and people can minister to one another, get to a place of true vulnerability, accountability, and that is enormously helpful over time to preventing burnout, promoting flourishing. So we do include group coach training as part of the training, and always recommend if somebody's going to do coaching, we really encourage them to consider a combination of individual and group, because there's just such inherent value in getting clergy together with one another when it's facilitated well.
So let's start with the question that's actually in the chat. So John was asking about the ballpark range for coaching sessions. In particular, he's finding that ministers struggle with the financial commitment to such things like therapy. So how do you get past that kind of worth it line? And also, how are you thinking about that within the flourishing ministry?
Yeah, great question. So that there's a real range of coaching fees. Is really fee oriented? Is that the question? Am I understanding
so
that
what's
right?
what's the ballpark range for coaching, and then also, what are the strategies to try to help people, overcome financial burdens?
The range that I kind of see for individual coaching based on the credentials of the coach and maybe their own fee structure. Most coaches that work with clergy I know are trying, and this is what we're trying to do, trying to make it as affordable and accessible as possible while also making it financially sustainable on their end at the same time, even in a nonprofit sort of context. So I would say anywhere from $30 a session all the way up to $300 a session. Sessions vary in length. The typical session is probably an hour, although there are coaches that do shorter sessions. Some prefer 30-minute sessions or 45-minute sessions. But this is another reason why group coaching can be really helpful, because it's much cheaper to divide that, say, $250 fee by 8 to 10 people. And it's much cheaper per person per session to be in group coaching, and still can be really helpful. The other thing I would say is that oftentimes pastors will find a way to have their denomination, if they work in a denominational context, and or church, share some of the cost. I do think it's important, in my experience, for the pastor to have some financial skin in the game, so to speak. And in the same way it is for therapy, even if it's reduced fee therapy, people attribute worth and value to things where they have to pay some money for it. So splitting the cost can also be another helpful piece. We also are doing things like package kinds of deals with like a denomination that wants to buy coaching for a bunch of their folks. I think I also saw Marty from Full Strength Network on here. Yeah, Marty Sawyers. If you're not familiar with Full Strength Network, they have an incredible ministry where they subsidize coaching and therapy fees for pastors at a very affordable membership rate. So that's another option I think people should check out if that's a real concern. Yeah, those are a couple of initial thoughts. The other thing I would say about the training is that you can use the coach training to do any kind of coaching. Of course, the ICF competencies apply to anything. And so most coaches, ICF says, are doing coaching part-time as supplemental income. There are people that do it full-time, but the majority do it part-time. And you make up the expense of the training in a fairly short amount of time through coaching fees once you go through the training. So it does pay for itself fairly quickly.
That's
for most people.
That's really, really helpful. And for those of you that are interested in thinking about especially clergy groups, I'm going to pop into the chat the YouTube link for the session that we did through the Common Table just a couple of months ago with Andrea Seeloff of the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology. They did an entire research project specifically looking at what are the best practices for effective clergy small groups. And if you think about that in the context of a coaching kind of relationship, there's some really helpful tidbits that Andrea will share in the video that is also on our website, and you can access the presentation slides as well as the white paper. So here's another one for you, Chris. So how did you differentiate the work of spiritual direction and the work of coaching towards flourishing? So how are spiritual
Yeah,
direction and coaching similar or distinct?
great question. And that one comes up often, as does distinguishing coaching and therapy. So I will say that is included in the training. So the scope of practice as defined by ICF, here's what coaching is, here's what it is not, is included, because we want to be careful to be ethically within the appropriate scope of practice. I would say if it were a Venn diagram, they're kind of overlapping circles here where spiritual direction overlaps with coaching. So there are moments or even large, extended conversations that are spiritual direction within coaching, but the focus is different. So there are folks that we have in our network who are trained spiritual directors as well as certified coaches who do both. Spiritual direction tends to be more exclusively focused on helping a person draw their attention to an awareness of what God's presence, God's activity in and around their lives, and in and through them, and focused on spiritual practices. There's certainly moments of that in flourishing and ministry coaching. Coaching, however, can be focused on a whole range of things. It could be, I've got goals for losing some weight or getting more exercise, or developing what Dr. Bloom calls our offstage relationships or backstage. I don't have any intimacy, close friendships anywhere in my life, which is often the case for pastors, where they can just be a person. So how do I set some goals to develop my support system, for example, or any number of things? That certainly, as I think about holistic anthropology, holistic spiritual formation, are all a part of spirituality. However, the focus is different, and the tools, the way that a coach is going to ask questions is a bit different as well, but there is some overlap.
So someone asked, what kind of psychological help is helpful for one undertaking coaching training?
What kind of psychological help? Health. Wow. Let me think about that for a second. Great question. And the reason I like the question, and this is an emphasis in our training as well, we emphasize the formation and well-being of the coaches in training themselves as a primary focus first. And then we need to focus on that first if we're going to be coaching other people into that kind of life. And so we include, for example, individual coaching sessions with one of our trained coaches. 3 of them are included in the experience, and a lot of small group discussion where you're talking about your own well-being in all these areas and what practices might you want to include in your own rule of life and those kind of things. I don't think, who in ministry is totally free from any form of human brokenness? No one. And everybody has struggles, and those ebb and flow due to all kinds of factors. I think generally speaking, is a person on a flourishing trajectory, maybe is the way I would say it. So if you're in the midst of a really significant clinical depression yourself, or an episode of burnout, or addictive behavior that's out of control, marriage in crisis, that kind of thing, I would recommend paying attention to that first, or in a really significant way while you're coaching other people as well. So none of us is psychologically all put together all the time and perfect. But I think in general, we want to be living the kind of life that we're recommending to other people, and be coaching out of a place of health as opposed to more out of a place of brokenness. And the unhealthier we are, the more we don't realize we're leading coaching, counseling out of our brokenness. And so that's where that self-awareness piece is so key for us to be cultivating as well.
Yeah, that's good. We were talking in our breakout too of in any career, in any ministry, you're going to have some good and some not so good, right?
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about coaches kind of staying in their lane. If they're coaching on this subject and this is their talent, to be careful and they're not going in a direction that maybe they're not qualified to go in, such as like clinical mental health or whatever that might be.
Correct.
We had several people asking a very similar question. How do you encourage clergy who haven't used coaching before to try it? Are there certain transitions during which you especially encourage coaching?
Great question. So certainly if a pastor is in any kind of career transition where they're early career, particularly because, and this is another great piece of work Dr. Bloom has done, those early phases of forming a what we call a positive pastoral identity. It's an identity formation process that takes some years, and mentoring and coaching are really helpful in that formation process. Pastors that are transitioning from one ministry to another, that's a really helpful time. Or if your church is going through really significant transition, and I guess in some ways what church isn't right now, in a post-COVID reality, toward retirement, I think can also be a really helpful time to have some coaching around well-being. As you know, I've had this role for 40, 50 years. What does life look like when that role it goes away or is no longer full-time? And how do I navigate that in a healthy way? Or other life transitions, empty nest, clergy that have gone through divorce, maybe those kinds of things. I think it could be helpful anytime, but those kind of transitions kind of come to mind. And most coaches, and we do this, offer a free initial conversation. Usually it's a half hour, maybe, because trained coaches are also going to be evaluating, is this going to be a good fit? Am I the right kind of coach for this person? And are they ready to be coached? Are they coachable? Because we don't want to, from an ethical perspective, waste a person's time and money or our own if that's not really going to be a good fit. However, I also wanted to respond, Vanessa, coaching is very overtly, unapologetically focused on whatever the client brings. So it's really not about the particular expertise of the coach. There is what's called content-rich coaching, where I may introduce in the right way at the right time some expertise that I have that is relevant to the conversation. But for the most part, I'm the expert on the coaching process, not any particular specific issue. And so I'm drawing a client's own solutions out of them. And that's one of the assumptions, that if you just have a thought partner and have some time and space, you probably can think through some creative solutions to the things that you want to work on, the goals you want to focus on. So we become expert in the process, and you don't necessarily have to be a content expert, although advanced coaching does talk about content-rich coaching as well. And we do like to have people that have at least 10 years of ministry leadership experience and some higher education in theology or psychology or something relevant, because of the level of conversation is such that we want to sort of curate that experience for people.
Right. So I'm assuming too, then any kind of struggle, so to speak, in ministry would be a good opportunity to seek out coaching. Like,
absolutely,
the pastor that's struggling with leading his team, or
you bet,
whatever that might be. Right. Yeah.
You bet.
And another part, I kind of asked both those questions together, but how do we encourage? Do you have some tips on how do we encourage people to get into coaching?
Sure. One of the ways I think that's been helpful in framing things around more positive psychology or that kind of approach is, everybody wants to flourish. And we're created for that. We're created for that. If you read the Genesis narrative, we're created for that in relationships and in work. Even there is work happening before the fall, if you look at the Genesis narrative carefully. And so to talk to pastors about that this can enhance your flourishing, this can enhance your effectiveness, help you to grow in ways that you really want to grow. I think all the time, and I say this to groups of clergy, of Eugene Peterson line from one of his books, which is this: I traffic in unlived truth as a pastor. In other words, most of us have all this head knowledge of theology and even psychology and what healthy pattern should look like. And there's a huge knowledge action gap for most all of us, in having some time and a conversation partner to help us set goals around that gap and lean into our own growth and flourishing can be enormously helpful. What I find is clergy are super hungry for this. They tend to be people that are motivated to grow, and that's a big part of why they're doing what they're doing in the first place. They want to help other people grow. They want to keep growing themselves. And so it's not kind of appealing to that desire to flourish and grow is often a really helpful way to invite people into this, as opposed to let's get you some help because you're depressed or you're messed up or you're struggling or whatever. And sometimes that's necessary to have those hard conversations, but appealing to that desire to grow, and what are you most longing for deep in your heart as a ministry leader.